him out of office in the first term. So that's another story. But what you need to know is the lead person that represented Laurance Rockefeller on this issue was Dr. C.B. Scott Jones. He played a part in this history. And this is going to be in a book coming out by Grant Cameron and I, who's also speaking here, called U.S. Presidents and the Politics of Disclosure. As soon as we can get a New York publisher with enough guts to publish it. They've had 6 months. They can't quite make up their mind, but we're not going to give up. So you get a sense that we're not just this isn't the same old, this isn't your father's conference. We're now dealing with people that address the president, work for the president, approach the president, represented families of enormous wealth and power, because this issue is about to break. Disclosure is going to take place, and as you follow the next months and year, you're going to see major people with power and influence starting to position themselves to take the best advantage of that. But in the meantime, we need to think about where we're going to go from there. What are we going to do when we finally know that, yes, we are in a galaxy loaded with beings? Well, Scott Jones has a lot to say about that, and he's going to tell you about that today. Scott?
Could you get the lights up so I can see the crowd?
We'll get some lights up. Absolutely.
Make sure you speak close to the microphone, please.
Get in real tight.
With the age of my ears, I appreciate the fact that the acoustics are less than perfect in this. And when I do pull away from it, why start waving hands and I'll close it. Is this all right? Can people hear this now? Okay. Thank you, Stephen. You're generous. There were a lot of people involved in the Rockefeller initiative. And I hope that they all get credit when this book comes out. I look at that as perhaps a failed approach. And I want to talk this morning about another approach that I call the international think tank approach. And I'll get to that at the end of this talk. I would like to set the scene by giving you how I look at politics and exopolitics. I think a pragmatic definition of politics, the one that I have been following for some time, is deciding who gets what, when, and how. And by extension, I would suggest that the definition of exopolitics is the process of deciding who gets what, when, and how throughout the universe. Earth and its inhabitants are players not by chance or by choice, but by the circumstance of being. The history of our being and the future of our existence are the core issues of exopolitics. There is relevant historical precedence for a strategy that I will recommend to the inadequate efforts that so far we have undertaken to what appears to be the unknowable. The strategy takes the government out of the loop and gives responsibility and opportunity to activists such as you to open the knowledge gate and to face whatever appears. I think that you will see, if you have not already reached this conclusion, that there is a direct relationship with exopolitics and global peace and survival. Humanity is placed in a highly vulnerable position by politics of exclusion and denial of the intimate relationship of all life in the universe. After a number of years of relatively high profile in the UFO and parapsychological fields, I chose to pull out of these arenas, and for the past 7 years have dedicated my energy to develop and implement university-based, student-run global peace programs. This decision in no way signals a diminished interest in and a concern about the challenging and enigmatic field of ET and UFO phenomena and their impact upon human civilization. For years, I ran an international team of psychics that supported the U.S. intelligence and federal law enforcement communities and by trial and error settled upon a protocol that produced usable results. Now, this was the assessment of our customers. We learned that early, in general, channeling or channeled input was simply not usable. There may be a productive way to use this input, but I have not yet discovered how to do it. Now, I bring this up because this type of input has been the staple for years in the ET community. Assuring words and dire warnings from assorted ascended masters and leaders of the Galactic Federation have filled many books and websites, and I'm sure will continue to do so for a long time. Now, however vexing this situation may be, it should not be ignored. While on one hand there is potential for it to be a disservice to rational thought and may seduce some to fail to take responsible action while waiting for the mothership to come to our rescue, on the other hand, it may turn out to be a valid and important way of communicating with the visiting others. I certainly would take notice of channeled material that observes something like this. The bad news is that you are closer to realize than you realize to extinguishing civilization. The good news is that it may not be too late to reverse the trend and that some of you will survive to start over. The rest of the news is that our role is to observe what happens. You are but one of millions of other planetary systems that are being forced to face the consequences of your own decisions. You won't be missed. We would use your quaint expression, good luck, but luck will have nothing to do with the outcome. Perhaps wake up would be more helpful. As a precursor to the strategy for discovery that I'm going to recommend, there are two instructive historical examples that I will refer. The first involves President Dwight Eisenhower. Of course, Eisenhower, as I'm sure most of you know, was not just a career Army officer, but during World War II was the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe. In 1952, he ran and was successfully elected president. It was during his administration that the U-2 spy plane, reconnaissance aircraft, was shot down over the Soviet Union. This was part of our effort to determine the existence of the alleged intercontinental ballistic missile gap between the United States and the Soviet Union. The dynamics of fear and the lack of hard intelligence concerning the true missile capability of each country were neatly described by Roswell L. Gilpatrick, who was Deputy Secretary of Defense. This is referred to as the Gilpatrick Principle. And here it is. The Soviets are forced to work very hard to keep up with what they know we are doing in order to keep up with what we think they are doing. Now, the point I'm making here is the potential of controlling and using intelligence for political purposes. Control over whatever special knowledge the U.S. government has about UFO phenomena is central to the ability to choose and create enemies. 3 days before Eisenhower left office and Kennedy came into the White House, Eisenhower gave what is known as the military-industrial complex speech. Eisenhower was a preeminent insider. Not only did he know the system, that in his career he headed significant parts of it and finally took the top part as President of the United States. This was Eisenhower's warning, quote, "In the councils of government, we must guard against acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for disastrous rise of misplaced powers exists and will persist." Now, I suspect that Eisenhower knew full well that what he warned against was inevitable. It was during Eisenhower's administration in the late 1950s that NASA commissioned the Brookings Institution, a very respected Washington, D.C. based think tank, to look into the implications of its space programs. A 272-page report entitled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs was published in November of 1960. Over 200 of the country's brightest minds were involved in this study. In the report, there was a short discussion about the possible impact of discovery of extraterrestrial life. A little over 1 page of discussion in the body of the report and nearly 2 pages of footnotes addressed this subject. A statement of Earth's profound sense of specialness opened the discussion. Quote, "It is conceivable that there is semi-intelligent life in some part of our solar system, or highly intelligent life that is not technologically oriented, and many cosmologists and astronomers think it is very likely that there is intelligent life in many other solar systems." The hubris of this was only slightly relieved by the following statement, quote, "While face-to-face meetings will not occur within the next 20 years, and parenthetically it says, unless its technology is more advanced than ours, qualifying it to visit Earth, artifacts left at some point in time by these life forms might possibly be discovered through our space activities on the Moon, Mars, or Venus." But then our superiority soars to the front by the comment, quote, "If there is any contact to be made during the next 20 years, it would most likely be by radio, which would indicate that these beings are at least equal to our own technological world." The report noted a possible response to discovery of extraterrestrial life. It might lead to greater unity to men on Earth, based upon the oneness of man, or on the age-old assumption that any stranger is endangering or threatening. It noted, quote, "Anthropological files contain many examples of societies sure of their place in the universe, which have disintegrated when it had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies expressing different ideas and different life ways. Others have survived such an experience usually did by paying the price of changes in values and attitudes and behavior," close quote. Perhaps one of the things that they would have to change was learning to curb their violence. That was my comment. Highly pertinent to this conference were the 2 research ideas and areas recommended. Quote, "Continuing studies to determine emotional and intellectual understanding and attitudes, and successful alteration of them, if any, regarding the possible consequences of discovering intelligent extraterrestrial life," close quote. And the second recommended study was historical and empirical studies on the behavior of peoples and their leaders when confronted with dramatic and unfamiliar behavior, or unfamiliar events or social pressures. Such studies might help to provide programs for meeting and adjusting to the implications of such a discovery. Questions one might wish to answer by studies would include: how might such information, under what circumstances, be presented to or withheld from public and for what ends? What might be the role of the discovering scientists and other decision makers regarding release of the facts of discoveries, close quote. Now, I don't know whether these studies were ever conducted, and if they were conducted, whether they are updated throughout time. Incidentally, it is in one of the footnotes of this 1-page discussion, and that page is entitled "The Implications of Discovery of Extraterrestrial Life," that this oft-quoted observation is made. Quote, "It has been speculated that of all groups, scientists and engineers might be the most devastated by the discovery of relatively superior creatures. Since these professions are most clearly associated with the mastery of nature rather than with the understanding and expressions of man," I think if I were a scientist or engineer, I would feel somewhat slandered by that statement. Now, the 3 footnotes to this 1-page discussion contains the most gutsy comments. Whether included or not in extraterrestrial material, an extraterrestrial should be treated, and this is the comment, whether or not extraterrestrials should be treated morally and ethically as if it were a, quote, human being. In the body of the report, they are referred to as creatures. And now a note about footnotes. In the intelligence community, a footnote is taken when there is considerable disagreement over a subject and no compromising language can be agreed upon. I think that is why, of the 100 minds that worked on this, there was 1 page of formal presentation and 2 pages of footnotes. Whether these recommendations have been acted upon, as I said, I do not know, but it certainly would be a treasure trove for the exopolitical researcher to find out. Now, the Cold War with the Soviet Union was certainly real and extremely dangerous, and the Cuban Missile Crisis came within minutes of sparking an exchange of strategic weapon systems that would have ended civilization. The Cold War ended when a more corrupt and less efficient Soviet system went bankrupt, trying to keep up with the U.S. expenditures on weapon systems. The Soviet evil empire imploded. Now, the evil empire was a powerful soundbite first used by President Ronald Reagan. Reagan is a very important player in exopolitics. More important, I suspect, than many UFO researchers acknowledge. The Reagan presidency is an instructive period for 2 important aspects of the exopolitical challenge. The first of these is the role that the private sector think tank community played, and the second is a striking example of blowback from the highly successful secrecy, denial, disinformation, counterintelligence program protecting UFO knowledge. The activities of an estimated 1,500 think tanks in the United States mirror the complex panorama of our culture and graphically demonstrate the power of money in influencing all phases of our democratic system. In 1981, a leading conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, published its mandate for leadership. President Reagan adopted 2/3 of its recommendation as public policy during the first year of his presidency. This was an essential part of a well-designed, long-range strategy devised in the mid-70s by conservative corporations, foundations, and politicians determined to reclaim power after 40 years of government by the Democratic Party. The Reagan Revolution was a direct result of this well-funded political and media machine. Now, the capstone of this effort was the Republican control of Congress in 1994. Such activity is well within the range of expected and accepted political action in our democracy. What must be understood is that there is a spectrum of think tanks that run from independent, nonpartisan, highly intellectually rigorous to strictly advocacy groups staffed by hired intellectual guns to produce biased studies designed to promote the policies of the group paying for the work. It was well known in Washington that both Nancy and President Reagan had strong personal interest in psychic and UFO phenomena. Now, this presented some very practical problems for the senior White House staff, but with a friendly press, damage control was effective, and his peculiar interests never seriously embarrassed Reagan. However, it became obvious by the mid-1980s that interest in extraterrestrial phenomena was not an adequate descriptor. In a variety of venues, at a high school visit, in remarks to the 42nd General Assembly of the United Nations, a meeting with the National Strategy Forum, and in several meetings with Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev, Reagan had a message he wanted to get out. His statement to the UN in September 1987 is a typical articulation of this message. Quote, "In our obsession and antagonisms with the moment, we often forget how much unifies all members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside, universal threat to recognize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside the world." close quote. Now, the significance of this repeated statement is really quite extraordinary. Even more extraordinary is the lack of impact that it had in the United States and in the world. Where was the press on this issue? Why didn't it cause editorial comment and serious investigation is why the President of the United States is repeatedly raising this issue. The reason for essentially no media response is because of the stunning effectiveness of the counterintelligence program that had been in effect for years and that was specifically designed to neutralize the media and to numb public interest on the subject. This policy and this program has been so successful that the media has never recognized its existence. I imagine that the director of this counterintelligence program has long been staggered by its effectiveness. Postulating the existence of a counterintelligence group naturally means that there is very likely a secret organization charged with a variety of tasks. The usual strategy of attempting to follow a money trail to locate this group has been unsuccessful. This suggests that there has been no conventional trail to follow. This inside group, I'll call the IG, has probably gone through several phases, with a trend line always in the direction of increased secrecy and discovering reasons to never reveal what they know and what the danger and what they think it means. I speculate that the IG group is small and made up of Caucasian males. Where is the IG located? Some military installations most certainly have been involved, but I assume now that Groom Lake Area 51 complex in Nevada now meets all the large logistical and engineering needs of the group. The headquarters of the IG could well be housed in the space of one or more large defense contractor. I can imagine an unwritten agreement that provides a certain number of square feet of office and lab space was easy to obtain. The personnel are badged as corporate employees and have simply disappeared into a large bureaucratic mass. Without any direct evidence, Lockheed and General Motors are my favorite candidates for this role. The actual cost of salaries, office equipment, communications, and travel are easily and invisibly covered by any one of hundreds of black intelligence programs. This nameless group has carried a heavy burden. What are we entitled to think about them? If all the facts were known, I suggest that there is a curve of respect, hope, and encouragement that would have peaked after a few years of silent and secret work. Since none of the facts are reliably known, neither approbation nor any degree of adoration seems fitting. Answers to the trite questions, what did they know and when did they know it, would certainly be needed before any labels could rationally be applied. There is another important consideration. From the ET abduction literature, we have stories of a powerful capability by the ETs to influence the mind, to insert complex and troubling scenarios, and to take away memories. The IG is well hidden from the American public, but is it known to the visiting others? If it is, what mind games have been played with the IG, and how has that affected decisions to share or not to share information about the exopolitical field? For over 50 years, there have been continuing reports of events that challenge current understandings of science, technology, and our position in the universe. The intellectual of this challenge is so obvious that a normal response would be globally focused research to determine what is going on. Why that has not taken place is as an important part of the mystery as the opportunity to make it happen. During my visits to China, and I must say that I had one of the most wonderful jobs that I can envision in Washington, D.C. For 6 years, I was special assistant to Senator Claiborne Pell, who was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And he hired me essentially to go around the world, and a lot of this was funded by Laurance Rockefeller, to find out what research was going on in other countries in these fields. Wasn't that a neat job? During my visits to China and the former Soviet Union on this subject, I discovered that they were quite open about their research that focused on sightings and the mechanics of UFOs. My suggestions of a non-government arrangement of research cooperation was always received with smiles. All of their work was government funded. On more than one occasion in Moscow, I was offered classified research reports. Now, the odds that I could safely exit the country with even one of these were next to zero. My previous interactions with the KGB in the 15 years that I spent in naval intelligence assured that very little I did in Moscow went unobserved. I finally told the director of the Institute of Theoretical Problems that I was willing to pay $5,000 for a slide of tissue taken from an ET crew member. He said that he didn't have that, and he didn't know if he could get it before I left Moscow. Now, I returned without it, and I have wondered ever since what impact that would have had if, first of all, it was a genuine item, and I've been able to introduce it into the small body of public evidence of cosmic culture's interactions. Obviously, one point I'm trying to make here is that among countries with a sophisticated scientific community, the United States is almost unique in its denial of this ubiquitous phenomena. During one of my visits to Moscow, the director of the institute hosting my visit informed me that a very senior scientist wanted to meet with me on a very important subject. Now, everyone in the institute knew that I was not a scientist, and they were generous and patient with me in answering my layperson's questions about their very technical reports. I was informed that the scientist was a very respected hero of the Soviet Union and was responsible for a huge phase array radar near Krasnoyarsk. This particular radar had been cited by the United States as a violation of the anti-ballistic missile treaty that we had completed with the Soviet Union. Now, the Soviets denied this, and they were strongly resisting U.S. demands to disassemble the radar that was required by the treaty. The meeting with this senior scientist was really an extraordinary experience. When he swept into the director's office, staff members shrank away from him with a mixture of respect and palpable fear. And he was the stereotype Russian. Now, everybody knows what a Russian is like. He's a great big bear of a man. This guy was a great big bear of a man. And he wore the little rosette that indicated that he had been awarded a hero of the Soviet Union. For 30 minutes, I was lectured in Russian with a capable English translation about the short-sightedness of the U.S. trying to force the Soviet Union to dismantle this radar. His insistence was that it was a vital installation and that technically it was not in violation of the treaty. Now, I countered by saying that I was not knowledgeable enough about the details of the treaty to make a judgment whether or not there was any merit in his argument, and observed that he was obviously not making a technical case to me, but simply asserting that the radar was important and needed. Now, I conceded that the Soviet military and the scientists would naturally feel upset and resentful that their diplomats had given it away. I asked, what did he want me to do about it? He requested that I carry the message to Senator Pell, and I promised that I would. When I briefed Pell and senior members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee staff about this Moscow conversation, it meant nothing special to them. In retrospect, it is obvious that I missed an opportunity in Moscow to question the significance of the Krasnoyarsk radar was in detecting UFO activity. I suspect that the translation I received was not as faithful as I had assumed. I imagine that what I was told, that the radar was important to us, that is to say, both the Soviet Union and the United States. I missed the message, and of course the Soviet scientists either didn't know or didn't believe that even a senior committee chairman in the Congress did not have a need to know about UFO intelligence. In my visits to China on this subject, they were never completely convinced that Senator Pell was not officially briefed about UFO phenomena, and that as a senior staff person, I was not also in the know. Now, the Chinese can be very direct. In a meeting with Chinese military and intelligence personnel, they pointed out how insulting and transparent the lie was that I was not officially briefed on this subject. It was not believable to them that I would meet with their Washington, D.C. embassy personnel as a special assistant to Senator Pell and specifically request that they arrange for visits to institutes and laboratories dealing with areas of psychic and UFO phenomena unless I had official knowledge, if not specific responsibility in these areas in my own country. I was never allowed to meet with the most senior personnel I requested because of my truthful insistence that I was not among the anointed in my own country. In one exchange, following a clear statement from the Chinese that they had a large amount of data that established the reality that Earth was repeatedly visited by whom they considered to be extraterrestrials, I asked why didn't China make an official announcement of this fact? There was a short embarrassed silence, and the response was, when the United States makes such an announcement, China will be a quick second. On one occasion in Peking, a Chinese Foreign Service officer made a statement to the effect that it was unfortunate that the United States government had stopped sharing information about ETs and UFOs. I could not get him to elaborate on that claim. More specific than the Chinese statement came from Moscow when Gorbachev commented upon President Reagan's trial balloon that failed to get off the ground. Gorbachev's comment about Reagan's ET threat assessment was this, quote, "In our meeting in Geneva, the U.S. President said that if Earth faced an invasion by extraterrestrials, the United States and the Soviet Union would join forces to repel such an invasion. I shall not dispute the hypothesis, but I think it is early yet to worry about such an intrusion." Now, the Gorbachev statement makes two important points. First of all, the heads of states of the two world superpowers actually had a discussion about ETs. And secondly, the Soviet assessment was that there was no current ET invasion threat. There can be no avoidance of the reality that we live in a dangerous world. I have bet my life that this situation can be improved. But while working to make this happen, evidence of the debilitating power of fear abounds. And the cynical use of this is a great evil. In the field of exopolitics, fear has been a much-used factor in strategies of controlling the agenda. The Brookings Institution is a classical example. The negative impact of contact is the dominant theme. I wonder what the fear-hope ratio in UFO literature is and why. The use of fear in society is a very common control mechanism. Organized religions have developed it into a high art, and totalitarian governments could not exist without it. When the Cold War ended in 1991, and fear of the evil empire naturally began to ease, but concomitantly, the star of the new right was in ascendancy. It was a geopolitical fact that the United States was the world's only surviving superpower. How that power should be used became an obsession with the self-styled neoconservatives, neocons, that's their own term, within the Republican Party. Once again, a think tank was used to provide the philosophical basis for the neocon agenda. A new think tank, the Project for the New American Century, PNAC, was established in the spring of 1997. Its initial report was based upon then Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney's 1992 doctrine paper that called for an expansion of U.S. power in the 20th century. The 76-page PNAC report, the title of which is Rebuilding America's Defenses, Strategy, Forces, and Resources for a New Century, was issued in September of 2000. The impact of this report upon the current Bush administration is greater than the impact on the Reagan administration of the 1981 Heritage Foundation's mandate for leadership, and it is more important to the country and the world. The report calls for a Pax Americana, and among other recommendations endorses preemptive wars, militarizing and achieving a Star Wars domination of space, and the use of tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield. Along with an extensive list of other aggressive recommendations, the document provides an intellectual justification for the continuation of a national security state and greatly strengthens the military-industrial complex and its importance in domestic politics. A year before 9/11, the neocon group predicted that the policy shift that they were advancing would come about slowly unless there was, quote, some catastrophic and catalytic event like a new Pearl Harbor. A continuing theme of this talk has been fear. That theme has certainly permeated every area of exopolitics. It is almost the touchstone of contact and abductee literature. The Robertson and Brookings report are cautionary tales about the need to shield society from knowledge about ET contact. Lurking in the background at a subconscious level is the taunt. If you only knew what I know, you would be scared as hell too. Not knowing what they know makes it difficult, but not impossible, to formulate a rational hypothesis to test the unrelating message of fear. Some basic questions include: is the fear based upon assumptions of presumed intentions to unleash technological capabilities beyond our capability to counter and survive? Is the danger so unlike anything Is the danger so unlike anything the world has previously faced that the common person would not recognize it? What has kept this threat at bay? And perhaps the most germane question, is the threat based upon the belief that the only predictable outcome of acknowledging that cosmic cultures have met is that unpredictable economic and political consequences will flow? Unpredictability is greatly feared by the arbiters of the status quo. Carol Rosin, an activist in promoting peaceful uses of space, has stated her concern that the ETs will be identified as the ultimate enemy and thus used to justify weapons in space. She identifies Wernher von Braun, when he was vice president of Fairchild Industries, as the source revealing this strategy. The first identified enemy, according to von Braun, will be the Soviet enemy. Thus, this followed by terrorism and third world crazies, then asteroids, and finally extraterrestrials. Up to this point, the von Braun threat list, articulated over 20 years ago, is on track. Only the ET threat remains officially unannounced, but it has been served up in 1,000 stealthy, fearful ways. Conservation of enemies is one of the basic rules of international relations. Even a superpower would be foolish to disregard or to flaunt this dictum. Creating enemies is relatively easy and a fool's game. It is far more difficult to forge reliable alliances, but that honors the reality of the interdependence of all life. I am unimpressed by the argument that Earth has a special value in the universe, that what we have done involving the use of nuclear weapons have attracted special attention to us. If there is some serious threat to the universe by our detonation of nuclear weapons, I give the ET low marks for allowing over 40 years of open-air testing of over 2,000 nuclear and thermonuclear weapons and devices by the United States, the Soviet Union, France, Great Britain, and China. Now, Independence Day and other movies aside, the fact that they come to us and maintain some sort of presence in our polluted environment means that they are in a technological lead that appears to be magic by our smartest minds. Just imagine how frustrating this has been to our military and how unpalatable it is to talk about it. It is my speculation that the principal reason for ET presence here is to see how their experiment is going along. Perhaps and probably we are one of many similar experiments in the universe. If they are true scientists, they will let the experiment run to its natural end. I do not expect any beneficial intervention and certainly see no threat from those who are conducting the experiment. Now, I will concede that there is certainly apparently more than one group with which we're interacting, and some of these may be equivalent to pirates in the space pirates with a similar morals and ethics. Now, here to me is an interesting wild card consideration. In his book, The Bible Code 2, The Countdown, author Michael Drosden writes that the key to the Bible Code is an artifact located somewhere in the Lisan Peninsula in Jordan and was brought to Earth at the dawn of civilization by ETs. The Lisan Peninsula is about 25 square miles in size, located at the southern end of the Dead Sea. According to the Bible Code, we are in the period of the end of days, with the year 2006 identified as a probable time when civilization will be extinguished in a nuclear catastrophe. According to Drosden and Dr. Rips, the Israeli mathematician who discovered the Bible Code, what the code provides is information about possible futures. This implies the obvious, that the future is not immutable, but dependent upon choices made. I've known Drosden for years. My current work involves designing university-based global peace programs. The first university in the Middle East to adopt our major program is the University of Jordan. Drosden has been attempting to get permission from the government of Jordan to conduct a magnetometer survey of the Lisan Peninsula to reduce the search area to a manageable archaeological undertaking to locate the key to the Bible Code. The key may be a computer, perhaps a communication device, that could be helpful in many ways to Earth and its occupants. Drosden considers his work to be the ultimate civilization-saving peace program. I have suggested to him that since we have parallel peace programs in Jordan, that we join forces. He is considering this offer. During a short conversation with Drosden in January, I returned to Amman on a scheduled visit to the university. Taking a day off from my university work, I hired a four-wheel drive vehicle with an English-speaking driver and spent a day hiking the Lisan Peninsula. With an assistant from my former psychic team, I had a very specific location to find. When I walked up to the location, I received a very positive dowsing response. That is where I have recommended to Drosden to start his magnetometer survey. Now, certainly this is a wild card undertaking, but it will be relatively low cost with potential huge payoff and should decide one way or the other whether the Bible Code has any efficacy. It may be that locating the key will be the easy part and that the greatest challenge will be determining what the key really is and how it can be used. For years, I have believed that the most important component of our interaction with the visiting others is spiritual. If this is accurate, the key will not respond to anyone or any group that is motivated by greed or dominated by fear. Where do we go from here? The issue does not appear to be favored or disfavored by more or one political party or the other. It is a bipartisan bastard child that repels more than attracts. 9 years ago, I ran a conference here in Washington, D.C. when cosmic cultures meet. It was designed to be the capstone of the process that Steve talked about. At the beginning, and I have, incidentally, I thought all of the proceedings were gone of that, but I discovered just before this that there is an abundant supply of them. And so if anyone would like the 400-page proceedings of that conference, they're out there for sale. In my opinion, Congress is a hopeless body on this subject. While one or two visionary members would be very helpful, there are insurmountable problems with Congress as an institution. There is no constituency votes to be won on the subject, and there are no affluent pro-UFO groups to tap for re-election support. As long as it is a stealth issue at the White House, there is no need for legislative oversight. I do not expect the Bush administration or any others to use the alien as enemy card unless some alien group overtly threatens the Earth in a way that the public is not dependent upon the White House to make the case that the threat is real. One strategy to consider would be to draft a short issues to be explored and attitudes to be measured paper that outlines the exopolitical enigma. This paper would be personally briefed to a number of international think tanks, and they would be requested to do pro bono studies on the subject. British, French, Russian, Indian, Chinese think tanks would be included. The approach deliberately is designed not to engage countries, but private think tanks from a variety of cultures and I think this would mitigate the national security issue and hopefully would fully engage issues of intellectual challenge and social responsibility. I think the French would be eager to participate in this. Their 3-year, 90-page study, UFOs and Defense, What We Must Be Prepared For, published in France in July of '99, is an extraordinarily important document. Written by an association of military, academic, industry, research, and senior government bureaucratic experts, it was delivered to the French president and prime minister for action. Intriguingly, one of the reports notes the responsibility of secret private contacts that might be attributed to the United States. This goes back, of course, to what I heard in China. And with understatement identifies the U.S. attitude towards the phenomena as, quote, most strange. They conclude that the physical realities of USO under control of intelligent beings is, in their opinion, quasi-certain. Well, we're ending the end. I want to say that there is a richness in the classical literature of India that has been unmined. It is referenced in documents that are 5,000 years old. When I was in India briefing our program to the Jawaharlal Nehru University, I went up to Dharamsala to meet with the Dalai Lama. And when that meeting was over, he suggested that I meet the archivist and visit the library of their headquarters. And when that was over, I asked the archivist, I said, is there anything in your archives or the library related to UFO phenomena? And he smiled and said, that will be the subject of your next visit. Now, the strategy, this is the end point. The strategy that I recommend of the international think tanks is not suggested out of frustration of previously failed approaches to the White House, the Pentagon, and the Congress, but primarily because it is a fresh idea designed to involve the international think tank community and the open, independent intellectual power it can bring to explicate exopolitical issues. I intend to use those results as a wedge to re-enter and engage the rest of the world in a dialogue on this. Thank you very much.